The room glittered with wealth, crystal stemware, long-stemmed roses, velvet drapes whispering against marble floors. Julian Ward's penthouse dinner party wasn't just about celebration. It was performance. And everyone knew it. Eva sat quietly, across from him, one hand on her belly, the other resting beside a half-touched glass of sparkling water. She hadn't said much all night. Her face glowed, but her eyes didn't. Julian, poised in a navy dinner jacket, tapped his wineglass with a polished silver ring. The sound was crisp, commanding. A toast, he said, rising. To truth, clarity, and knowing where you really stand. The guest chuckled awkwardly. Eva looked up, eyebrows tightening. He didn't look at her as he continued. And sometimes, Julian added, truth comes in the form of betrayal. Silence. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. He turned now, slowly, theatrically, to face her. Isn't that right, Eva? She blinked. Julian. His voice was calm. Too calm. I've had my doubts for months, he said, eyes scanning the room like a seasoned performer. The sudden pregnancy, the timelines, the late nights out. So I did what any rational man would do, had some tests run. A fork clattered. Someone gasped. Julian, please, Eva whispered. Her voice cracked in the air like delicate glass. He stepped forward, pulling a single sheet of paper from his jacket. Not my child, he said coldly, tossing the page onto the table before her. No one moved. No one breathed. Eva stared down at the paper without touching it. A row of printed numbers blurred before her eyes. She didn't need to read it. She already knew what it said, or at least what it claimed. You told me you trusted me, she said, standing slowly. You said we were a team. Julian smirked. That was before I realized I was being played. Eva's voice dropped into something hollow. You humiliated me. In front of everyone. Julian didn't flinch. No, Eva. You did that all. By yourself. She stood in silence for a beat. No tears, no outburst. Just stillness. Her hand moved protectively over her belly, and she turned toward the elevator. No one stopped her. No one dared as the doors closed behind her. Julian raised his glass again. To freedom, he said, and drank. By morning, it was everywhere. Ward accuses wife of infidelity. Public dinner turns hostile. Pregnant scandal. Billionaire. Blows up marriage with DNA bombshell. Julian Ward and the baby that isn't his. Paparazzi waited outside the building by dawn, lenses trained on the front entrance. Eva didn't appear. Inside the penthouse, Julian sat with his PR handler. Vin, you really want this out there? Vin asked, flipping through headlines. This public, Julian shrugged, sipping espresso like none of it mattered. She made her choices. Let the world see. Vin hesitated. You sure this is airtight? Because if you're wrong, Julian shot him a sharp look. I'm not wrong. But Vin noticed something else, a flicker. The way Julian gripped the cup. The twitch behind his eye. Doubt, maybe. Or something darker. Far from the city, in a coastal cabin where no drones could fly, Eva sat cross-legged on the floor, arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't slept. She hadn't cried. She simply stared out the window as waves rolled in, one after another, and whispered softly to the child inside her. He thinks it's over. But he doesn't know what's coming. The world didn't wait to ask for the truth. It accepted the one. Julian fed it. Within 48 hours of the dinner party implosion, Julian Ward was on morning shows, podcasts, and business panels. Perfectly groomed. Calm. Measured. Hurt, but dignified. She wasn't who I thought she was, he said in one interview, his voice low and pained. You build a life with someone, and then, sometimes you find out that life was built on lies. Clips went viral. Hashtags trended. Hashtag justice for Julian. Hashtag Eva exposed. Hashtag billionaire betrayed. Eva watched them play over and over, alone in the coastal cabin. Each time she heard his voice, each time she saw that carefully constructed frown of betrayal, it cracked something in her. Not because she believed him, but because the world did. Julian sat across from his PR handler, Vin, inside a soundproof office. The glass walls shimmered with the skyline behind him. You're welcome, Vin said, tossing a tablet onto the desk. Damage control complete. You're the face of male resilience now. Brand deals, investor confidence, nothing's dipped. Julian barely looked up from his coffee. She'll disappear soon. They always do. Vin shifted in his chair. You ever think she might come back with something? Julian finally looked at him, eyes glinting. There's nothing to come back with. DNA results? Handled. Vin nodded slowly but didn't press. Still, something didn't sit right. Julian was too smooth, too rehearsed. He had seen grief before, real heartbreak. And this wasn't it. This was a man building a narrative like a business pitch to in the days that followed. Eva's name became a curse. Old friends stopped replying. Former colleagues withdrew quiet support. Even her therapist emailed to pause their sessions. The world had turned its back, but Eva didn't flinch. Not anymore. She stayed off social media, changed her number, and with Claire's help, her only remaining friend, she began to gather the fragments, every photo, every voicemail, every text message Julian had sent during the pregnancy, the sweet ones at first, then the cold demands to stay quiet, to not go public. Claire laid them all out on a long wooden table, like pieces of a broken map. You sure you want to keep doing this? She asked, watching Eva scan through voice notes. Eva nodded. He erased me, but I kept the echoes. One night, a new envelope arrived by private courier. No return address, no stamp. Eva opened it cautiously. Inside was a single photograph, Julian. Years ago, with a woman she didn't recognize. They stood close, his hand on her waist. The timestamp read, 3 weeks before Eva's pregnancy was announced, and on the back, scribbled in slanted handwriting, you weren't the only one. Eva's hands trembled, but not from fear. From clarity, he wasn't just a liar, he was hiding. Something much worse. Back in Julian's tower, Vin sat reviewing analytics when a pop-up from a journalist landed in his inbox. The subject line read, multiple women. Same story. You sure you've got the right side? Vin didn't open it yet, but he stared at it for a long time. Outside, Eva stood barefoot on the cold deck of the cabin, eyes fixed on the sea. The wind caught her hair. The sky was bruising into twilight. She placed her hand gently on her stomach and whispered, let them say what they want. Truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits. The coastal cabin was quiet. Almost too quiet. Eva hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days, not even Claire. The only sound was the creak of wooden floors and the occasional crash of waves slamming against the rocks below. This place had once been a refuge. Her mother's getaway. A place of laughter, baking bread, and handwritten notes tucked between old books. Now, it had become a kind of holding cell. A sanctuary lined with grief. She sat at the edge of the bed, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her fingers tracing the curve of her growing stomach. The twins kicked. She closed her eyes, just to feel it. It wasn't sadness she felt anymore. It was something deeper, a kind of drowning. Julian had always been charming. That was how it started. The late-night conversations about building legacies. His obsession with control disguised as vision. The gifts, the trips, the way he slowly rewrote the rules of their marriage, until her choices didn't feel like choices anymore. And when she told him she was pregnant, she remembered the smile that didn't reach his eyes. He kissed her forehead and said all the right things. But that night, he stayed late at the office. Then it became every night that Claire's voice crackled through the cabin's outdated landline, breaking the silence. You haven't checked in, Claire said gently. I know. I just needed space. I'm coming tomorrow. No, please. Eva whispered. Not yet. You don't have to go through this alone. Eva looked out the window again. I'm not alone. Not really. There was a pause. Claire exhaled. Okay, but when you're ready, I have something to show you. And it changes everything. Eva didn't ask what. Not yet. Later that evening, she opened the old chest at the foot of the bed. Inside, her mother's journals. She found one marked with the year she got married. She hadn't looked at it in years. The first page read, marry only a man who sees you, even when you're silent. She closed the book. Julian never asked her what silence meant to her. He only filled it with his voice. That night, Eva dreamt of her wedding day. Only this time, she wasn't in white. She was in black, barefoot, walking into a room of mirrors. Julian stood at the center, clapping slowly. You think anyone believes you? He asked. That I in the dream, she answered. I don't need them to. She woke up gasping, hand over her chest, sweat pooling in the collar of her shirt. Across the city, Vin couldn't sleep either. He paced in his apartment, The journalist's email still unread in his inbox. Julian had told him everything was handled. But Vin remembered the voicemail. The clipped audio. The gap in the recording. He opened the email finally. Inside were names. 3 women. All had dated Julian. All disappeared quietly. One had a restraining order that was sealed. Vin's hands went cold. Back at the cabin, Eva stared into the mirror. Her face looked older, but clearer, stronger. She turned sideways, watching the curve of her belly. Then she said softly, "You won't inherit my silence. You'll inherit the truth." And, for the first time in days, she smiled. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and baby powder. Eva sat quietly, her palms resting on the swell of her belly. A magazine lay unread on her lap. Around her, expectant mothers chatted, comparing due dates and nursery themes. She didn't join in. The nurse finally called her name. Inside the dimly lit exam room, the soft hum of machines surrounded her. The ultrasound technician greeted her with a warm smile, but sensed her quietness. 28 weeks, Eva said, lying back, lifting her sweater. The cold gel spread across her skin, and then the wand moved. "There they are," the technician said. 2 perfect boys. Eva turned toward the monitor. 2 heartbeats. 2 identical profiles, moving in rhythm. Synchronized, she stared in silence. Then, identical, the tech nodded. Monozygotic. 1 egg. 1 father. It's rare, but beautiful. Eva blinked hard, her lips parting, breath catching in her chest. 1 father. Not 2. Not some confusion. Not what Julian claimed. She had always known. But now, it was on a screen, echoing in 2 perfect thumps. Back at the cabin, she sat in the living room. Ultrasound photos spread across the coffee table like sacred pages. Claire arrived just before sunset, letting herself in quietly. Eva didn't look up. "They're identical. It's him." Claire sat beside her. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." Eva slid one of the photos across the table. "He told the world I was sleeping around, that the babies weren't his. He made me into a cautionary tale." Claire hesitated. "So what now?" Eva looked up. "I make him into one." That night, she wrote a letter to the twins. A habit she had started in the early weeks. She wrote slowly, deliberately, her handwriting steady despite her shaking hand. "You were always his. But he gave you up before you were born. That was his choice. My choice will be different." In the city, Julian stared at the framed sonogram photo still tucked inside his desk drawer. The one Eva had given him before she left. He'd told Vin he threw it away. He hadn't. He poured another glass of whiskey. His hands weren't steady. The headlines were fading now. Attention was shifting, but something inside him wasn't quieting. It was starting to scratch. Far from the city, the moonlight poured through the cabin windows. Eva watched the waves again. Only this time, she wasn't still. She was humming. 2 lives kicked inside her. 1 truth. And no one, not Julian, not the press, not his money, could rewrite it. Julian stood in his penthouse, staring out at the skyline. The city stretched beneath him like something he'd built, with his own hands. And yet, it felt distant tonight. He sipped his 3rd drink. The ice already melted. The PR campaign had worked for a while, but cracks had started to show. A minor investor pulled out yesterday. "Too much noise," they said. A board member hinted he should clean up his personal brand. Harper, his on-again fiancée, had gone radio silent. Even Vin was quieter in meetings. Julian replayed Eva's last words in his mind. Not the ones she'd said aloud, but the way she stared at him before she left. Not broken, not begging, just still and sure. That look was beginning to rot him from the inside. Vin watched Julian from across the conference table the next morning. His boss wore his usual armor, tailored suit, rehearsed smile, effortless control, but something was off. More than off. "Julian," Vin said carefully, "we need to talk." "About what?" "The journalist who emailed me. She sent more." Julian narrowed his eyes. "And she's digging into sealed court records. Restraining orders. 2 women before Eva." Julian leaned back. "That was years ago. Has nothing to do with this. But they're building a pattern." "There is no pattern," Julian snapped. Vin didn't flinch. "Then why seal them?" Julian stood, cutting the conversation short. "You're paid to manage storms, not chase ghosts." Vin held his tongue, but he saved the email and sent it to a private contact at the Times, just in case. Meanwhile, Eva was preparing for her next ultrasound when a name popped up on her phone. Julian. She froze. He hadn't called since the night of the dinner. Her finger hovered. Then she declined the call. A minute later, a voicemail. She waited an hour to listen. His voice came through the speaker low, strained. Eva, I don't know if you'll ever listen to this. I've been thinking about a lot. About us. About what I said. If they're mine, I need to know. Just give me the truth. Please. She sat still, replaying the message once, then twice. Claire, who had arrived minutes earlier, raised her eyebrows. He's unraveling. Eva shook her head. No, he's calculating. Claire crossed her arms. So? What now? Eva reached into her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. I had the DNA tested. Privately. No leaks. No labs in his pocket. Claire leaned in, eyes wide. And Eva handed her the paper. 99.9999% probability. He's the father. Claire exhaled. So this is your move? Eva stared at the window. Not yet. That night, Julian sat alone in his media room, lights off, watching old home videos. Eva, laughing in the kitchen, flour on her nose. A beach trip, her hands around his waist. She was never the liar. He was. The silence in the room wrapped around him like a noose. Back at the cabin, Eva wrote in her journal again. You taught me how silence can be used to hurt. I'll teach you how it can heal. But first, you have to feel it. Julian stood. At the podium, cameras flashing like lightning storms. Behind him, the sleek new headquarters of Ward Capital. In front, reporters, investors, and a sea of lenses hungry for a soundbite. He adjusted his collar, smiled, spoke smoothly. We're thrilled to unveil our expansion into the international clean tech market. A new era for sustainable innovation. A voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Do you deny fathering Eva Ward's children? Julian froze. The air thickened. He blinked into the sun, mouth slightly open. Excuse me. There are reports of a sealed paternity test. That they're yours. Can you confirm? Murmurs erupted. Another voice. Mr. Ward, how do you respond to the statement released by Ms. Ward's attorney this morning? Julian turned slowly to his PR team. Vin wasn't there. Hours earlier, Vin had sat in his car outside the press conference, phone in hand. He'd read Eva's lawyer's statement twice. It was elegantly brutal. Our client, Eva Ward, has remained silent out of dignity. However, after prolonged public defamation and false accusations, we confirmed the results of a private DNA test showing Mr. Julian Ward is the biological father of her twin sons. Ms. Ward will not be giving interviews. Her truth is in the silence he once used to destroy her. Vin didn't attend the conference. He sent the statement to every major outlet. Then he drove away. Back at the event, Julian's hands clenched the podium. He forced a smile. No comment. Today is about the company's future, not personal distractions. But the questions didn't stop that BY evening. Headlines dominated the feeds. DNA confirms Julian Ward lied about paternity. Twin truth. Eva Ward breaks her silence. Quietly, from power to paternity, Ward's empire shaken, Julian stormed into his penthouse, slamming the door that he ripped off his tie, hurled his phone across the room. It shattered. Harper wasn't there. She hadn't been for days. That he stood in the silence he once controlled. Now, it owned him. At the cabin, Claire read the headlines aloud to Eva. You really did it, she whispered. Without a single interview. Eva looked up from the baby booties she was folding. I didn't need noise. He made enough for both of us. Claire smiled. The lawyer did great. Eva nodded. She was careful. No attacks. Just facts. And the media? They'll move on. I didn't do it for them. She gently rubbed her stomach, now heavy with weeks of waiting. I did it so my sons would never grow up believing. Lies win. That night, Julian sat in the dark. His phone buzzed on the counter. A burner Vin had given him for emergencies. He picked it up. That a single message lit the screen. She never needed to scream. That's what scared you most. No name. No reply. That he dropped the phone. Meanwhile, at the cabin, Eva watched the moon rise, her fingers intertwined with her unborn sons' lives. She didn't smile out of vengeance. She smiled out of peace. The paperwork lay open on the kitchen table. Two birth certificates. Still unsigned. Eva hovered over them, pen in hand. The names had taken her months to decide. She had whispered them to her belly during long nights of doubt, tested them in the wind on the porch, tried them in poems in her journal, but the father's name line remained empty. Claire, across the table, sipped her tea and stayed silent. She knew this was Eva's moment. No advice, no nudging. Eva finally spoke. Do you think they'll ask about him someday? Claire set her mug down. Yes, and you'll tell them the truth. That he lied. That he couldn't love what he couldn't control. Eva sighed. Her pen hovered again. Then, slowly, she wrote two names at the top of the page. Luca Jonah Ward Elias Morgan Ward. The surname stayed, but the father's name line? Blank, not erased. Just not offered. Back in the city, Julian stared out at the marina. From his balcony, a press intern handed him a printed article from The Atlantic. When silence becomes a sword, how Eva Ward turned absence into power. He didn't read it, that he couldn't. What gnawed at him wasn't the press, it was the knowledge that Eva had never even spoken his name, that she'd never attacked him, never shouted. And that silence was destroying him more effectively than a scandal ever could. Later that afternoon, Eva packed a hospital bag. Claire folded onesies beside her. You're ready, Claire said. Eva nodded. Almost. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. The paternity test results. The original copy. Untouched, she tucked it gently into a keepsake box labeled "One Day." That evening, Eva sat on the porch alone. She read aloud the letters she'd written to the twins, softly, her voice shaking sometimes, but never cracking. You were born from a storm. But storms teach the trees how to stand. You were wanted. Always. Even when I was the only one who knew it. Across town, Vin received a message from an unknown number. A single sentence. Thank you for walking away when it mattered. He didn't reply, but he saved it. Julian paced in his office. The silence was unbearable. He scrolled through his call list. He hovered over Eva's name. It was still saved. Still at the top. That he didn't press call. Because what could he say now? I'm sorry, didn't feel big enough. You were right, felt too late. So he sat in the dark, with no reply, and no name written on two certificates he would never hold back. In the cabin, the moonlight lit the edge of Eva's bed as she settled in for sleep. The nursery was ready. The names were chosen. And the truth, quiet, undeniable, and whole, was finally hers. The pain started just before dawn. It was sharp, low, unmistakable. Eva gripped the edge of the sink, breathing through it. Her face reflected in the dim bathroom mirror. Pale, determined, braced. She'd been waiting for this moment for weeks, half dreading it, half needing it to finally arrive. She called out, Claire. Her best friend was already awake. Within minutes, the overnight bag was in the car and the road stretched ahead. In silence, mist curling over the highway like a veil. The city was still asleep as they reached the hospital. The nurses moved fast. Twins meant precision. Inside the delivery suite, the lights were warm, soft. A midwife named Jo squeezed Eva's hand and whispered, You've got this. You've already done the hard part. Eva gave her a tired smile. No, that part's still coming. Julian stared at the news alert on his phone. Sources confirm Eva Ward admitted for labor. Twins expected today. He was across town, alone, in his glass-walled office. The room was full of light, but felt cold. He read the headline 3 times. Then once more. He didn't move. Back in the hospital, time lost its meaning. Pain came in waves, pulling, crushing, releasing. And still, Eva breathed. Focused. Between contractions, she whispered to her sons, I'm here. I'm not afraid. I need you to come into the world knowing that love is louder than lies. At 9:46 a.m., Luca was born. His cry cut through the air like a declaration. At 9:48 a.m., Elias followed, quieter, wide-eyed, his tiny hand already gripping the nurse's thumb. Eva wept, not from pain, but from everything that had come before, and everything that wouldn't reach them now. In the recovery room, Claire sat beside her, brushing her hair back gently. They're perfect, she whispered. Eva nodded slowly. They are. And you? Eva turned her head toward the clear bassinets. I feel light. Claire smiled. It suits you. Later that evening, a nurse delivered flowers. No note. Just a sleek black box with deep red roses inside. Eva didn't ask who sent them. She left the box unopened on the windowsill. Julian watched the hospital from across the street. He'd driven there without realizing it. He hadn't parked legally. He hadn't brought anything. Not a gift. Not a card. Not even a name. From his car, he saw Claire leave with a small bag. But not Eva. Not the babies. He didn't go inside. He just sat and watched until the streetlights blinked on and the shadows deepened. Inside the hospital room, Eva held both boys against her chest, skin to skin. They were warm, breathing in sync. She whispered their names. She whispered her mother's name. She whispered her own name. Then she whispered a promise. You will never have to prove your worth. You were born enough. And with that, she closed her eyes. Finally, truly at peace. The discharge papers were ready by noon. Eva sat up in her hospital bed, her hair pulled back, two bassinets beside her. The boys were swaddled in soft gray blankets, sleeping, their tiny chests rising in tandem. A nurse handed her the forms. Just need you to confirm the details. Name, Eva Morgan Ward. Infants, Luca Jonah Ward and Elias Morgan Ward. Father, blank. The nurse paused. Would you like to include a name? Eva looked at the line for a long time. Her pen hovered. She thought of Julian's hands gripping the table when he accused her in front of their friends. She remembered the headlines, the media storm, the silence from him when the DNA results surfaced. Then she thought of the boys, their warmth, their perfect synchronicity, their little fists curling in sleep. No, she said gently. That space stays empty. The nurse gave a soft nod and filed the papers without a word. Across town, Julian sat in his office again. He hadn't gone to the hospital. He hadn't sent a follow-up. He hadn't picked up Vin's calls. The empire he'd spent years building was still intact, but there were cracks now, hairline fractures in places no one could see. His PR firm had dropped him. Too high risk, they'd said. The headlines hadn't stopped either. They had only changed tone. Ward heirless? Millionaire's children given no legal father. Eva Ward erases Julian from birth record. Not needed, he stared at the article on his laptop. The photo of Eva walking out of the hospital, both babies in her arms, Claire behind her with the overnight bag. They looked like a family, and he looked like a ghost at the cabin. Eva sat on the porch that night with a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The boys slept inside. Claire came out with 2 mugs of tea. She sat beside her. They'll ask someday, Claire said softly. About him. Eva nodded. I'll tell them what matters. Claire sipped her tea. What's that? That he made a choice, and so did I. His was silence when truth mattered. Mine was silence when power returned. Claire glanced at her. You think he's suffering? Eva's eyes didn't move from the horizon. Yes, but not from loss. From knowing the damage was self-inflicted. Julian stayed up all night watching the security footage from his penthouse lobby. It had become a habit that he watched the doorman wave at guests. He watched empty elevators rise and fall. He watched Eva enter months ago, before the dinner party, before the explosion. Her face had been hopeful then, soft, still open. Now, she didn't come here. She never would again. And he had nothing of hers left, not even a name beside his children's. At dawn, Eva stood at the edge of the lake behind the cabin. The birth certificates were tucked safely inside a folder on the nightstand. The last piece of unfinished business was done. No man would define these boys. No inheritance would buy their sense of worth. They would not grow up in their father's shadow, only in their mother's light. And as the sun climbed over the water, Eva whispered, this was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth. Julian sat in his study with a legal pad and pen cameras. No lawyers, no headlines, just the quiet hum of a man alone in a house too big for his regrets. He stared at the blank page for nearly an hour before writing the first word. Eva, the pen hovered so many times. He had drafted this in his head. Lines like I'm sorry, or I didn't know how to love you right, or the boys deserve better played on a loop. But on paper, every sentence felt dishonest. Performative. Too small for the damage done. He tried again. Eva, I've been thinking about the night at the restaurant. The way you looked at me when I said those words. I told myself I didn't care, that I was protecting my image. But the truth is, I cared more than I ever admitted. Not about the child. About being right. I needed to be right. Even if it meant being cruel. He paused. Ran his fingers through his hair. I watched the news when they were born. I saw their names. I saw your name. And mine, missing. That line, blank, spoke louder then. Any insult you could have thrown at me. You let me vanish with grace. That he stopped again. Looked at the photo on his desk. A framed picture from years ago. Eva on a balcony, laughing at something he'd said. That version of her. He killed that with silence. In the cabin nursery. Eva rocked Luca gently as Elias dozed beside her. The room smelled of warm milk and lavender. She hummed softly, one of the old lullabies her mother used to sing. Claire stood in the doorway. "They're going to be all right," she whispered. Eva nodded. "They already are." Claire stepped closer. "You ever think he'll try to be part of their lives?" Eva paused. "Maybe, but I won't invite it. And if they ask, years from now, I'll let them decide who their father is, by the stories they've heard, not by whose name is on paper." Julian sealed the envelope, the N.O. address. No stamp, just her name, written in his old handwriting. Faint, almost apologetic, he placed it in the drawer of his desk. Then he turned off the light and walked out of the study. 2 days later, he called Vin. The voice on the other end sounded wary. "I'm not asking for PR help," Julian said. "I just need someone to tell me the truth." Vin waited. "Then, you were afraid she'd take something from you." "I was afraid she'd see who I really was." Vin didn't offer comfort. "She did, and she still left the door closed. Not slammed." Julian hung up. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful. It was earned. Back at the cabin, Eva walked the boys down a wooded path behind the house. Leaves rustled above, and sunlight filtered through like soft gold. They gurgled and reached for the sky. She knelt beside them and whispered, "Everything you are was born from what I refused to become." That night, Julian sat in the dark, staring at the sealed letter on his desk. That he could still send it, but he knew it wasn't for her. It was for him. That a letter he'd never have the courage to mail. A truth too late to redeem. That he left it in the drawer and closed it slowly. It had been 6 months. No press. No drama. No statements. Just 2 tiny boys growing fast, and a mother who refused to speak in the language of revenge. Eva stood at the edge of the community park, watching Luca toddle toward the swings, Elias crawling in his wake, determined not to be left behind. Claire laughed from the bench nearby, phone in hand, snapping photos they'd one day laugh at in worn photo albums. That a mother passed by and smiled. "Twins." Eva returned the smile. "Yes, both miracles." No one asked where the father was, and she never offered. Julian still lived in the penthouse, but rarely stayed there. He moved through life like a shadow, attending board meetings, making speeches, shaking hands. But the light was gone from his eyes. What haunted him most wasn't the media fallout. It was the quiet. No lawsuits. No tell-all memoir. No public shaming. Eva had simply walked away. She hadn't tried to ruin him. She hadn't made herself a spectacle. She had done the one thing he could never withstand. She had stayed silent. Vin met Claire for coffee that same week. He'd reached out to her after seeing a photo of Eva and the twins in a local parenting magazine. An article about single mothers starting small businesses. She never even named him. Vin said quietly, stirring his tea. Claire leaned in. She didn't need to. She could have destroyed him. Claire nodded. Exactly why she didn't. Vin looked down. "I sent him the article." He didn't respond. Of course not. He's still trying to understand how silence made more noise than anything he ever said. Eva's fashion studio was modest but sunlit. Soft fabrics and earth. Tones draped from hooks along the wall. The air smelled like cedar and wool. A client asked, "Are you the Eva Ward from the news?" She smiled faintly. "I used to be." The client hesitated. "It was brave. What you didn't say." Eva paused her sewing, turned to the window where her boys played in the yard. It wasn't about bravery. It was about choosing peace over proving a point. Julian sat in his penthouse, opening old letters, running his fingers across embossed logos from a time when power meant everything. 1 envelope remained, her name written across it. That he opened it. The paper inside was blank. His hand shook. Then he understood. The real message had always been silence. That night, Eva walked the twins along the lake path, stars blinking above like quiet witnesses. Elias held her finger. Luca babbled something close to Mama. She whispered, "He tried to silence me, and now it's the only thing I offer him." She lifted both boys into her arms, kissed their foreheads, and closed the door behind her. The house glowed warm. From within the courtroom. No apology, just 2 children asleep beside a woman who had turned silence into sovereignty.